What happens when a glittering charity gala becomes a public nightmare? Elise Hayes was 7 months pregnant when she arrived at the plaza, a beautiful wife on the arm of a powerful CEO. But she didn't know that her husband's mistress was waiting inside. In front of hundreds of New York's elite, Elise was humiliated, attacked, and kicked in the stomach. The room froze. Her husband did nothing. But just as all hope was lost, a single voice cut through the silence. A billionaire, a man no one expected, stood up and said, "Stop. This isn't a story about a party. It's a story about a brutal betrayal and a rescue no one saw coming." The air in the back of the Mercedes Maybach was so thick with unspoken words it was suffocating. Elise Hayes stared at the diamond droplets of rain streaking across the tinted window, her hand resting protectively on the hard swell of her stomach. At 7 months, the baby was a constant, active presence, a small, tumbling reminder of what was supposed to be a happy life. Beside her, her husband, Matthew Hayes, wasn't looking at the New York City lights. His face, usually so charismatic for the covers of Forbes and Fortune, was illuminated only by the sterile blue light of his smartphone. "Matthew," Elise said, her voice soft. He didn't look up. His thumb was scrolling. Are you excited about tonight? The Children's Legacy Fund is a wonderful cause." "It's good for the brand, Elise. We need the new VC round for the AI division. Showing up, looking strong, it's part of the game." He finally locked the phone and slid it into the pocket of his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. He adjusted his Patek Philippe watch. "You look fine, by the way. The blue is good." "Fine." The word landed in the silence like a stone. She wasn't just fine. She was wearing a custom-made silk gown by Oscar de la Renta, designed to accommodate her pregnancy with elegance. But in Matthew's eyes, she felt she had been reduced to a simple, functional object. The wife, the expectant mother, the accessory. For the past year, Matthew had been the golden boy of the tech world. His company, Hayes Innovations, had skyrocketed in valuation. But the higher they climbed, the more he receded from her. He became a man of briefcases, late-night board meetings, and the lingering, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his blazers, a scent she'd convinced herself was just from over-eager investors. The Maybach pulled up to the grand entrance of the Plaza Hotel. Paparazzi flashes erupted like gunfire, and for a moment, Elise was blinded. Matthew was instantly on. A wide, practiced smile snapped onto his face. He stepped out, and the cameras clicked wildly. He turned, offering a hand to her. But it was a gesture for the crowd, not for her. Elise took his hand, smoothed down her dress, and forced her own smile. The ballroom was a sea of glittering opulence. Baccarat crystal glasses chimed, an orchestra played softly in the mezzanine, and the scent of peonies and old money filled the air. They were surrounded by the most powerful people in the city. "Ah, Matthew, there you are!" A portly man in a velvet jacket boomed, clapping Matthew on the back. "We need to talk about that new data mining patent." "Robert, good to see you," Matthew said, his smile never faltering. He turned to Elise, his eyes already distant. "Darling, you go get some water. Mingle. I have to, you know." He didn't wait for an answer. He simply let go of her arm and was absorbed into a cluster of men, his laughter already ringing out, loud and false. Elise was left alone. She stood by a towering floral arrangement, feeling like a ship marooned in a sea of champagne. She watched her husband, the man she had loved since college, the man who had promised her the world, work the room. He was magnetic. She had to give him that. People were drawn to him. And then she was drawn to him. From across the ballroom, a woman in a structural, blood-red McQueen dress appeared. She was impossibly tall, with raven-black hair slicked back into a severe ponytail. Her name was Seraphina Rivers. Elise knew her. Everyone did. Seraphina was a notoriously aggressive tech analyst and socialite, known for her scathing articles and her equally scathing romantic history. Elise watched, her blood turning to ice, as Seraphina glided up to Matthew. She didn't offer a handshake. She placed a perfectly manicured hand, tipped in black, directly on the lapel of his tuxedo. She leaned in, her red lips moving close to his ear. Matthew didn't pull away. He didn't step back. He smiled. He leaned in too and whispered something back. Seraphina laughed, a throaty, intimate sound that cut through the orchestra's melody. Elise felt the baby kick, a sharp, sudden jab, as if it too could sense the betrayal, the late-night meetings, the unfamiliar perfume. It wasn't an investor. It was Seraphina. It had been Seraphina all along. The air left Elise's lungs, and for the first time that night, she didn't feel fine. She felt the floor begin to tilt beneath her feet. For a long moment, Elise couldn't move. The world had compressed into a single, agonizing tableau. Her husband, her child's father, leaning into the embrace of another woman in a room full of their peers. The sound of the orchestra seemed to fade, replaced by the rushing of blood in her ears. She should have turned and walked away. She should have left the gala, gone home, and called a lawyer. That would have been the sensible, dignified response. But dignity felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. A cold, unfamiliar rage began to replace the shock. It wasn't a hot, screaming rage, but a chilling, quiet one. It was the rage of 1,000 small dismissals, 100 late nights spent alone, and the sudden, sickening realization that the entire foundation of her life was a lie. And she was carrying his child. She couldn't just leave. She had to do something. She started walking. She didn't run. She didn't storm. She walked with a measured, deliberate pace, her hand never leaving her stomach. Each step was a tiny prayer. Please let this be a misunderstanding. Please don't let him do this to me. Not here. Not now. The walk across the ballroom floor felt like a mile. She passed a table of socialites who paused their conversation about a ski trip to Aspen to watch her, their eyes curious. She passed Robert, the portly investor, who gave her a dismissive nod, his attention already on his next target. As she got closer, she could hear them. "Absolutely ridiculous, Matthew," Seraphina was saying, her voice a low, seductive purr. "The board is ancient. If you want to really disrupt the market, you need to shed the dead weight." "The dead weight holds half the company's stock, Sarah," Matthew replied, his voice laced with an amusement Elise hadn't heard directed at her in years. "So? You're a shark, Matthew. Act like one." Seraphina's fingers were no longer on his lapel. They were tracing the line of his bow tie. Elise was 10 feet away, 5 feet. She stopped right behind Seraphina. She waited. Neither of them had noticed her. They were in their own toxic, charged bubble. "Matthew," Elise said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. It sliced through their bubble instantly. Matthew froze. The charismatic smile vanished, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed horror. He looked like a child caught stealing. His eyes darted from Elise to Seraphina, then to the people around them. He was already calculating the social damage. Seraphina, however, didn't flinch. She turned, slow and deliberate, a predator assessing a new arrival. Her eyes, dark and heavily lined, raked over Elise from head to toe. They lingered for a sickening, insulting moment on Elise's swollen belly, and a small, cruel smirk played on her lips. "Well, well," Serafina said, not even bothering to remove her hand from Matthew's chest. "It speaks." "Serafina," Elise said, her voice trembling only slightly. "I believe you're touching your husband." Serafina finished for her. She laughed. "Darling, I'm doing a lot more than touching him." The admission was so blunt, so brazen, it took Elise's breath away. She looked at Matthew. "Matthew, are you going to say something?" Matthew opened his mouth, but only a small, strangled sound came out. He looked at Elise, then at Serafina, then at the floor. He was a coward, a complete, utter coward. "He's not going to say anything," Serafina said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Because he doesn't want to. He's tired of playing house with this." She gestured vaguely at Elise's pregnancy. This whole domestic, pathetic little charade. "You don't know anything about our life," Elise whispered, the tears finally welling in her eyes, hot and angry. "I know everything," Serafina countered, stepping closer. She was a head taller than Elise, all sharp angles and menace. "I know he can't stand the sight of you anymore. I know he finds this whole Mother Earth thing repulsive. He told me himself." "Stop it," Elise said, shaking her head, the tears now falling. "He told me he wishes you'd just disappear, that this baby was a mistake. His words, not mine." "Matthew!" Elise cried out, her voice cracking, pleading with him to deny it. Matthew just closed his eyes. He couldn't even look at her. And in that moment, Elise knew it was true. All of it. The pain was a physical thing, a white, hot knife twisting in her gut. She felt dizzy, nauseated. She put a hand out to the wall to steady herself, but there was no wall. Serafina saw her new, profound vulnerability. She saw the tears, the brokenness, and she decided in that instant that she hadn't done enough. "You really are pathetic," Serafina hissed, her face contorting with a rage that seemed to come from nowhere. "You think this bump saves you? You think it solidifies anything?" Before Elise could even process the words, Serafina moved. The room had already grown quiet. The periphery of the conversation, the small clusters of guests near the bar, had sensed the shift in energy. The music from the orchestra faltered as the string section watched the drama unfold. The air grew still, charged with the electric potential of a public disaster. Elise was trapped in the bubble of Serafina's hatred, her gaze locked on the woman's twisted face, still begging Matthew with her eyes to intervene. "Do something. Say something. Be the man I married." He remained a statue of shame. "You're just a placeholder," Serafina spat, her voice now rising, drawing more and more attention. "A temporary inconvenience, and once that thing is out of you, he's leaving. He's coming to me." "No," Elise whispered, a final, desperate denial. "Yes!" Serafina shrieked. The civility of the gala was gone. This was primal. "He's mine! He doesn't want you! He doesn't want it!" Serafina took a sharp, aggressive step forward, crowding Elise's space. Elise flinched and stumbled back, her heel catching on the thick pile of the Persian rug. She was off balance, vulnerable, and Serafina, in a fit of pure, unadulterated malice, attacked. It wasn't a slap, it wasn't a hair pull, it was something far more horrific. She shoved Elise, hard, with both hands against her shoulders. Elise, 7 months pregnant and already unsteady, cried out as she fell backward, her arms flailing. She landed hard on her side, the impact knocking the wind out of her. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, filled the ballroom. A woman dropped her champagne flute, and the sound of it shattering on the marble floor was like a gunshot. Elise lay on the floor, dazed, her hip aching. Her first panicked thought was for the baby. She tried to curl into a ball to protect her stomach, but Serafina wasn't finished. Fueled by adrenaline and a terrifying, bottomless well of rage, she stepped over Elise. Her face was a mask of triumph. "You pathetic cow!" she screamed. And then the unthinkable happened. Serafina Rivers lifted her leg, her sharp, stiletto-heeled Christian Louboutin shoe glinting under the chandelier light, and she kicked Elise. It wasn't a wild, clumsy kick. It was targeted, vicious. She aimed it low, right at the curve of Elise's belly. The kick connected. Elise let out a scream that wasn't a word, but a raw, animal sound of pure agony and terror. The pain was immediate, a blinding, searing starburst that radiated from her abdomen. It was followed by a terrifying, wet warmth. "The baby!" she shrieked, clutching herself, her eyes wide with terror. "My baby!" The entire ballroom was frozen. 200 of New York's most powerful elite citizens stood in stunned, absolute silence. The orchestra was dead. The waiters stood with trays frozen in their hands. Matthew Hayes stood over his fallen, pregnant wife, his face the color of ash. He looked at her, then at the dark, spreading stain on the light blue silk of her dress. He looked at Serafina, who was breathing heavily, her eyes still wild, a triumphant, ugly smile on her face. He did nothing. He didn't move toward his wife. He didn't yell at his mistress. He just stood there, paralyzed by his own cowardice, his entire world collapsing in on him. Elise was sobbing on the floor, a mess of silk and terror and blood. "Please," she begged, to no one and everyone. "Help me, please, my baby." Serafina just watched her, her chest heaving. She had won. She had proven her point. She had destroyed her rival in the most public way imaginable. And then a new voice cut through the horrified silence. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a yell. It was a voice of absolute, cold, and unquestionable authority. "Stop." The word, simple and declarative, echoed in the cavernous ballroom. It commanded the attention that Elise's screams had only frozen. The crowd, which had formed a tight, horrified circle around the scene, parted. A man walked through. He wasn't the tallest man in the room, nor the flashiest. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored chiton suit that was remarkable only in its quiet, expensive understatement. He had dark hair, streaked with a touch of silver at the temples, and his eyes were the color of a winter sky, a pale, icy blue. This was Johnny Thorne, the real billionaire. If Matthew Hayes was new money tech, Johnny Thorne was old money dynasty. His family's name was etched onto museums, university libraries, and hospital wings. He was the head of Thorne Industries, a global logistics and private equity empire that could buy and sell Hayes innovations 10 times over without noticing the expense. He was also intensely private, almost reclusive. His presence at a public gala like this was so rare it was almost unheard of. Johnny Thorne walked past the frozen guests. He walked past Matthew, giving him a look of such profound, glacial contempt that Matthew actually recoiled. He walked straight up to Serafina Rivers, who was still panting, her rage just beginning to curdle into confusion. She looked at him, her expression hardening. "This has nothing to do with—" "I said stop," Johnny said again. His voice was quiet, but it vibrated with a contained power that made Serafina, for the first time in her life, flinch. He didn't spare her another glance. He continued past her, kneeling on the priceless rug, staining the knee of his $10,000 trousers in Elise's blood. He knelt beside Elise, shielding her from the watching crowd with his own body. The hundreds of smartphones that had just started to rise, sensing a viral moment, were slowly lowered. No one filmed Johnny Thorne. He gently touched Elise's shoulder. She flinched, her eyes wild with pain and fear. "Elise," he said, and his voice was suddenly, shockingly gentle. All the ice was gone. "My God, Elise, it's me." Elise stared at him, her vision blurry with tears. The pain was coming in waves, sharp and terrifying. I don't—" "It's Johnny," he said. "Johnny Thorne, from the summer house, on the lake." Elise's sobs hitched. She stared at his face, really seeing him for the first time in 15 years. The face was older, harder, but the eyes were the same, the kind, quiet eyes of the boy who had taught her to skip stones. "Johnny?" she whispered, her voice a child's. Is that you?" "It's me, Ellie," he said, using the name no one had called her since her mother died. "I'm here. You're going to be okay." He shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her, covering her, giving her back a shred of the dignity that had been stolen. He turned his head, his profile sharp and aristocratic. He looked over his shoulder, not at Matthew, but at a large, stern-looking man in a simple black suit standing by the doorway. "Graves," Johnny said, his voice hard again. The man, his security detail, was already on his phone. "Ambulance is en route, Mr. Thorne. 3 minutes. Call Dr. Orris at Lenox Hill," Johnny commanded. "Tell him I'm coming in. I want the best neonatal team in the city prepped and waiting. Now." "Yes, sir." Johnny turned back to Elise, his hand finding hers, his grip firm and steadying. "They're coming for you, Ellie. Just hold on." It was only then that Matthew seemed to break from his paralysis. The sight of another man, this man, touching his wife, holding her hand, had finally snapped him out of it. "Thorne," Matthew stammered, stepping forward. What are you doing? This is my wife. I'll handle this." Johnny Thorne rose to his full height. He was not as tall as Matthew, but he seemed to take up all the air in the room. He looked at Matthew, his blue eyes empty of all emotion save for a deep, simmering disgust. "You'll handle this," Johnny said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. You stood there and watched. You let this thing," he gestured to Serafina, "assault your pregnant wife. You did nothing." It happened so fast," Matthew pleaded. "It doesn't matter," Johnny said, cutting him off. He turned to his security guard. "Graves, when the police get here, make sure they take both of their statements." He pointed at Serafina, then at Matthew. "Detain them if you have to." "You can't do that," Matthew sputtered. "She's my wife." "She's my patient," Johnny snapped back. "And you are a liability. You are not coming near her." The wail of sirens grew louder, converging on the plaza. Serafina, finally realizing the magnitude of her error, had gone pale. This wasn't a cat fight. This was assault, and the victim was now under the personal protection of Johnny Thorne. "Johnny," Elise whispered from the floor, her hand tightening on his. "The baby. I can't feel the baby moving." The mask of command on Johnny's face cracked. He knelt again, his voice urgent. "They're here, Elise. We're going to take care of you. We're getting you out of here." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and he made a promise. "I've got you. I won't let you go again." The journey from the plaza's grand ballroom to the sterile, white-light reality of the Lenox Hill Hospital emergency bay was a blur of chaos and efficiency. Paramedics swarmed Elise, a team so focused and professional that they seemed to exist in a different reality from the stunned, glittering crowd they pushed through. Johnny Thorne never left her side. When Matthew tried to push his way into the ambulance, shouting, "I'm her husband, I have to be there," Johnny's security guard, Graves, simply stepped in his path. Graves was a mountain of a man, and he didn't say a word. He just stood there, an immovable object, until the ambulance doors closed, leaving Matthew alone on the curb, surrounded by the flash of paparazzi who had finally caught the scent of a real story. Johnny rode in the ambulance, sitting on the small bench, his hand holding Elise's, even as the paramedics worked on her. "Vitals are dropping," one of them said. "Possible placental abruption. Get the O2 mask on her." "Johnny," Elise whimpered, the mask fogging with her breath. "I'm so scared." "Don't be," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of sirens. "You were always the bravest person I knew, Ellie. Just hold on." They bypassed the public ER, entering through a private, secured entrance. Dr. Aris, a world-renowned obstetrician, was waiting, his face grim. "Mr. Thorne, we're taking her straight to surgery prep." "I'm not leaving her," Johnny said. "She's in my hands now," the doctor said firmly. "You'll be in the waiting room." They wheeled Elise through a set of double doors, and for the first time, Johnny was forced to let go of her hand. He stood in the hallway, his suit stained with Elise's blood, his adrenaline high, slowly ebbing, leaving behind a cold, shaking dread. Graves appeared at his side, holding out a fresh, dark grey shirt and a bottle of water. "Your father called, sir," Graves said quietly. "The news is already on Twitter. They're calling it the Gala attack. Serafina Rivers has been detained for questioning." "And Matthew Hayes?" Johnny asked, his voice flat as he unbuttoned his ruined shirt. "Detained as well, sir, as a material witness. He's not handling it well." "Good," Johnny said. An hour passed. Then 2. Johnny paced the private waiting room, a space usually reserved for visiting royalty. He didn't check his phone, which was vibrating incessantly in Graves's pocket. He just stared at the doors. Finally, Dr. Aris emerged, pulling off his surgical cap. Johnny was at his side in an instant. "The baby," Johnny started. "The baby is a girl," Dr. Aris said, a small, tired smile on his face. "She's premature, just under 3 pounds, but she's a fighter. The kick, it was brutal. It caused a partial abruption. We had to perform an emergency C-section. A few more minutes and we would have lost them both." Johnny leaned against the wall, the relief so profound it was almost painful. "And Elise? She's stable. She lost a lot of blood, but she's young, strong. She's in recovery. You can see the baby in the NICU and then you can see her. But Mr. Thorne, who are you to her?" Johnny looked at the doctor. "I'm an old friend." The NICU was a room of beeps and hushed tones. Elise's daughter was in a small, clear incubator, a tiny, perfect thing with a tuft of dark hair. Johnny stood for a long time, just watching her breathe. Then he went to Elise's room. She was asleep, her face pale against the white pillows, an IV in her arm. He sat in the chair by her bed, and for the first time in 24 hours, he let himself just be. He had seen the guest list for the gala 2 weeks ago. He never went to those things, but he'd been scanning for competitors, investors, threats. And then he saw her name, Elise Hayes, Mrs. Matthew Hayes. He hadn't been able to get it out of his head. Elise, his Ellie, married to Matthew Hayes, a man Johnny knew from the business world to be a ruthless, narcissistic shark. He had to go. He had to see for himself if she was okay. The truth was, Johnny Thorne and Elise Davies had grown up together, in a way. His family owned the sprawling summer estate on Lake Geneva. Her mother was the estate's head housekeeper. For 10 summers they were inseparable. He was the quiet, nerdy billionaire's son. She was the fiery, funny girl who taught him how to fish and how to stand up to his overbearing father. He had fallen in love with her when he was 15. By 18, they had made plans. They would go to college together. They would travel the world. But then Elise's mother got sick. Cancer. Elise stayed behind to care for her. Johnny went to Stanford, promising to write, to call, and he did. But the distance and the pressure from his family to marry his own kind created a rift. Their last call was stilted, painful. He was a 20-year-old coward, and he'd let his father bully him into a clean break. He'd regretted it every day for 15 years. He had tracked her discreetly from afar. He knew when her mother passed away. He knew when she moved to New York. And he knew when she married Matthew Hayes, a rising star in tech. It had broken his heart, but he'd told himself she deserved happiness, even if it wasn't with him. But seeing her tonight, seeing her terror, her pain, the monster she was married to, the old, deep, protective love he had buried for over a decade came roaring back. Elise's eyes fluttered open. She focused on him, her expression confused, then clearing. "Johnny," she rasped, her throat dry. "I'm here, Ellie." "The baby. She's beautiful," he said, his voice thick. "A little girl. She's so strong, just like her mother." Tears streamed from the corners of Elise's eyes. He just let her. He let her do it. "Shh," Johnny said, taking her hand. "He will never, ever hurt you again. Neither of them will." "Why are you here?" she whispered. "After all this time." "I saw your name on the guest list," he said, his voice low and honest. "I had to see you. I had to know if you were happy." He looked away, his shame evident. "When I saw you with him, I thought you were. And then, I never should have let you go, Ellie. I was a fool." Elise looked at this man, this powerful mythical figure from her past, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored her own. "You're here now," she whispered. Just then, the door to the hospital room burst open. It was Matthew. His hair was wild, his bow tie undone. He looked manic. "Elise, thank God. I've been trying to get in for hours. They wouldn't let me." He stopped when he saw Johnny Thorne sitting by his wife's bed, holding her hand. Matthew's face, a mask of feigned concern, contorted into a snarl of pure, jealous rage. "Thorne, get your hands off my wife!" Johnny Thorne rose slowly from his chair. He didn't release Elise's hand. "She's not your wife, Hayes," Johnny said, his voice dangerously calm. "Not anymore. Get out." "You can't tell me what to do." Matthew advanced into the room, his eyes wild. "She's my wife. That's my child in the NICU. You think you can just waltz in here, playing the hero?" "The hero part was easy," Johnny cut him off, his voice like a razor. "The bar was low. All I had to do was not be the man who let his pregnant wife get kicked in the stomach in front of 200 people. Matthew flinched as if he'd been struck. It was a shock. I didn't know what to do. That woman is insane. "She is," Johnny agreed. "But what does that make you?" "Elise," Matthew pleaded, turning his attention to her. "Baby, you have to tell them. Tell this vulture to leave. We're a family. We can get through this. We'll sue Serafina. We'll go to therapy. Whatever you want." Elise looked at the man she had once loved. His desperate, theatrical pleas were transparent. He wasn't worried about her. He wasn't worried about their daughter. He was worried about his stock price. He was worried about the optics. She squeezed Johnny's hand. "Johnny," she said, her voice weak but clear. "Yes, Ellie. Tell him to leave." Matthew's face went white. "Elise. No, you're upset. You're on medication. You don't know what you're saying." "She knows exactly what she's saying," Johnny said. He pressed a button on the wall. "Graves." The door opened and the large security guard entered. Behind him were two uniformed NYPD officers. "Mr. Hayes," one of the officers said, his voice polite but firm. "You've been asked to leave. We'd prefer not to make this a scene." "This is ridiculous," Matthew shrieked. "I am the husband. I have rights." "Sir, your wife has requested you not be here," the officer continued. "And frankly, we still have a few more questions for you about the assault. Your statements, they're not lining up." Matthew's rage deflated, replaced by a cold, visible fear. He looked from the police to Graves to Johnny, and finally to Elise. You're doing this?" he hissed at her. "You're choosing him? After one night?" Elise finally met his gaze. The woman who had been terrified and weak on the ballroom floor was gone. In her place was a mother, a survivor. "You didn't choose me," she said, her voice hollow. "You didn't choose our daughter. You chose your reputation. You chose her. You made your choice, Matthew. Now I'm making mine." She turned her head away from him, a final, complete dismissal. Matthew stood there, trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. The officers took his arms. "Let's go, sir." He was escorted out of the room, still sputtering about his lawyers. The door closed, leaving Elise and Johnny in the quiet. "Thank you," Elise whispered. "That's just the start," Johnny said. He pulled out his phone. "Graves, get my legal team. I want 3 of them. The best divorce attorney in New York, the best criminal prosecutor, and the best corporate raider. I want them at this hospital in 1 hour." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The story was the lead on every news outlet. Gala attack was the headline, but the real story was the subtext. CEO lets Mistress kick pregnant wife. Hayes Innovations stock went into freefall. By the time the market opened, it had dropped 40%. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting. Serafina Rivers was charged with felony assault and reckless endangerment of a child. Her high-powered family tried to get her bailed out, but Johnny Thorne's legal team, acting on Elise's behalf, presented evidence to the judge: security footage from the Gala, eyewitness testimony from a dozen billionaires that deemed her a flight risk and a danger. She was remanded to Rikers Island. Matthew Hayes was the subject of a brutal, public execution. He was fired by his own board before lunch. The statement cited a catastrophic failure of personal and professional judgment. He was locked out of his office, his assets frozen pending an internal investigation, which Johnny's team may or may not have suggested by pointing out several of Matthew's financial irregularities to a key board member. Within 24 hours, Matthew had lost his company, his reputation, and his access to his own bank accounts. He was served with divorce papers and a restraining order, citing the public endangerment and extreme cruelty clauses. Elise and her newborn daughter, whom she named Hope, were moved from the hospital to one of Johnny's secure private residences, a quiet, beautiful brownstone in the West Village, complete with a private medical staff. Johnny was a constant, but respectful, presence. He didn't push. He didn't pressure. He simply was there. He brought her coffee. He read to Hope in the NICU. He handled the press, the lawyers, the entire maelstrom of her former life, allowing her to do the only thing that mattered: heal and bond with her baby. The silence in the private hospital wing at Lenox Hill was absolute, broken only by the quiet, rhythmic beep of Elise's own heart monitor. The chaos of the Gala, the sirens, the screaming, the sterile panic of the operating room. It had all receded, leaving behind a stillness that felt both hollow and sacred. Matthew was gone, ejected by the police. Serafina was in a holding cell, her name already a trending hashtag of infamy. Elise was alone, but not. In the chair by the window, sleeping in the uncomfortable upright way of a sentry, was Johnny Thorne. He had not left. Graves, his security guard, stood stationed outside her door, a silent, immovable mountain who vetted every nurse, doctor, and, on one occasion, a delivery of flowers. The flowers were from the event planners at the plaza, accompanied by a card of such grovelling, terrified apology that Johnny had read the first line and instructed Graves to dispose of it. Elise's hand drifted to her stomach. The hard, pregnant swell was gone, replaced by a tender, stitched emptiness that ached. The baby? Hope? Her mind, foggy with medication, latched onto the name. As if sensing her panic, Johnny stirred. His head came up, and his eyes, bleary but sharp, found hers. He was on his feet in an instant, his suit jacket long discarded, his white shirt rumpled. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who had kept a long, desperate vigil. "Ellie," he said, his voice a low rasp. "You're awake. Do you need anything? Water? A nurse?" "The baby," she whispered, the word a painful crack. I need to see her." "I know," he said, his voice impossibly gentle. "Dr. Orris said you could as soon as you were awake." He pressed the call button. She's incredible, Ellie. Tiny. But she has your fight. I've been visiting her every hour." "You saw her?" "They let me look through the glass. She's in the NICU. She's a perfect, beautiful little girl." He swallowed, his own emotions thick in his throat. "She looks like you." A nurse entered, and within minutes, Elise was being carefully transferred to a wheelchair. Johnny arranged the blankets over her lap, his touch professional, but achingly tender. They navigated the quiet, late-night halls to the neonatal intensive care unit. It was a room of quiet beeps and hushed miracles. A nurse led Elise to a specific incubator in the corner, and there, surrounded by wires and tubes that seemed impossibly large, was the smallest person Elise had ever seen. She was perfect. A tiny translucent hand was curled by a face with a full, pouting mouth. "Oh," Elise breathed, a sob catching in her chest. "Oh, Hope." "She's 3 pounds, 2 ounces, the nurse said softly. "A fighter. You can reach in. Just use the sanitizer." Elise's hand trembled as she slid it into the porthole. She laid one finger on the baby's chest. The skin was like velvet. Hope stirred, her tiny features pursing. Johnny stood behind Elise's wheelchair, his hands resting on the handles, a silent, supportive presence. Elise cried, not from sadness or pain, but from a profound, primal upwelling of love and relief that was so powerful it threatened to consume her. This tiny creature was the only thing in the world that mattered. She was the reason. She's real," Elise whispered. "She's real," Johnny affirmed, his voice thick. "And she's safe." The next few days were a blur. Elise's world compressed to a 200-foot triangle, her room, the NICU, and back. Her physical recovery was steady, but her emotional state was a minefield. One moment, she was filled with a fierce, lioness-like love for her daughter. The next, she would be paralyzed by a flashback to the ballroom, to the red sole of Seraphina's shoe, to the cold, dead look in Matthew's eyes. On the third day, Johnny's legal team arrived. They were not the kind of lawyers Elise was used to. Matthew's lawyers were slick, loud men in shiny suits. Johnny's team consisted of 3 people. A sharp, older woman named Eleanor Vance, whose specialty was asset dissolution, a former district attorney named Michael Quinn, and a quiet, unassuming man who just introduced himself as the corporate guy. They met in a hospital conference room. Elise was in a robe, but she felt more powerful than she had in years. Johnny sat at her side, not as her boss, but as her advocate. "Elise," Eleanor Vance began, her voice like crisp parchment. "First, let's establish your goals. My assumption is that you want a complete and total severance from Matthew Hayes, financially, legally, and personally." "Yes," Elise said, her voice clear. "I want him gone. I want to protect my daughter." "Excellent." Eleanor opened a file. "We've already filed the divorce papers on grounds of extreme cruelty and public endangerment. We've also filed for an emergency, permanent restraining order for both you and Hope. A judge, who is a personal friend of Mr. Thorne's family, signed it this morning." Michael Quinn spoke next. "On the criminal front, Serafina Rivers is being held without bail. Her family is powerful, but the video from the gala is conclusive. She will not be seeing daylight for a very long time. We are pressing for the maximum: felony assault, aggravated battery, and reckless endangerment of a child. She is facing, at minimum, 15 years. Elise nodded, absorbing the news. It didn't bring her joy, only a cold, grim satisfaction. "And Matthew?" she asked. The corporate guy finally spoke. "Mr. Hayes is contained. The board of Hayes Innovations convened an emergency morals clause meeting. Given that his actions directly led to a 40% drop in stock value at market open, they were eager to remove him. He was fired with cause. His assets are frozen, pending both the criminal investigation, in which he is being looked at for potential complicity, and the divorce settlement." "The prenup," Elise said, the word tasting like ash. "He made me sign one." Eleanor Vance smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. "The prenup has been voided, Elise. His public, flagrant infidelity, combined with the criminal act, has rendered it toilet paper. We will be seizing 60% of all marital assets, a complete buyout of his shares in your name, and punitive child support. By the time we are finished, he will not be able to afford a new Patek, let alone a lawyer to fight us." Elise signed the papers, her hand surprisingly steady. With each stroke of the pen, she felt a chain breaking. When they left, she was alone with Johnny. "You're ruthless," she said, a small, tired smile on her face. "No," Johnny said, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I am thorough. He left you. He hurt you. He will have no power over you or Hope ever again. That is a promise." A month later, Hope was strong enough to leave the NICU. Elise was healed enough to leave the hospital. But the question loomed: where was home? The penthouse she had shared with Matthew, with its cold glass walls and his lingering scent, was unthinkable. Johnny had, of course, already solved this. "A car is waiting," he said, as a nurse helped Elise into a simple new dress he'd had delivered. "It's a brownstone, West Village. It's one of the Thorne family's private properties. It's empty, secure, and quiet. Graves has vetted a staff. A baby nurse, a chef. It's yours, Elise. For a week, for a year, for as long as you need. There are no strings." Elise looked at him, her heart aching with a gratitude that was so deep it was painful. "Johnny, I can't." "You can," he said, cutting her off gently. "You and Hope need a safe place to land. Let this be it." Walking into the brownstone was like walking into a different life. Unlike the sterile, modern penthouse, this was a home. It had old, polished wooden floors, bookshelves that reached the ceiling, and fireplaces in every room. The nursery was already complete, painted in a soft, pale yellow, with a beautiful white crib. And in the living room, in a large, unopened box, was a state-of-the-art, multifunction baby swing. The next 2 months were a cocoon. Elise's life became a gentle routine of late-night feedings, quiet walks in the walled garden, and rediscovering her own strength. The nightmares of the gala faded, replaced by the reality of Hope's soft coos and the scent of baby powder. Johnny was a constant, but respectful, presence. He never stayed at the brownstone, but he visited every day. He would arrive at 5 p.m., his suit jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, and ask, "How are my girls?" He would hold Hope, who was growing plump and curious, and talk to her in a low, serious voice about global logistics, much to Elise's amusement. But mostly, he and Elise just talked. They talked about the 15 years they had lost. They talked about her mother's illness and his father's pressure. He confessed his cowardice, the suffocating weight of his family's expectations. She confessed her loneliness, the feeling of being an accessory in her own marriage. They were two broken people, carefully, tentatively, mending each other. One snowy afternoon, Elise came downstairs to find Johnny on the living room floor, surrounded by plastic parts and a diagram, swearing softly under his breath. "It's the baby swing," he said, not looking up, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I can orchestrate a hostile takeover of a German conglomerate, but this Uniflex gasket, see, it's witchcraft." Elise laughed. It was not a small titter. It was a real, deep, from-the-belly laugh, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. The sound was so bright and unexpected that it made them both freeze. Johnny looked up at her, his face softening, a genuine, unguarded smile spreading across his lips. "There you are," he whispered. "I've missed that laugh." The moment hung in the air, warm and charged. The friendship that had been their anchor was clearly, undeniably, becoming something more. But neither of them moved, terrified to break the fragile, sacred peace they had built. That evening, Elise was standing by the window, rocking a sleeping Hope. She watched the snow fall, her reflection, and that of the cozy room, staring back at her. She thought about her old life, her old self. It felt like a story she had read about someone else. Johnny entered, a cup of tea in his hand. "I saw the news," he said quietly. "Oh." Elise hadn't watched the news in months. Matthew Hayes. He was seen selling his watch, the Patek, to a pawn shop on the Lower East Side. Apparently his legal fees have bankrupted him. He lost everything. Elise felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, just emptiness. "He's just a man, Johnny, just a sad, weak man." "Yes," Johnny said. He put the tea down. He looked nervous for the first time. "Elise, I've been working on something. With Dr. Aris. I wanted to mark this." "Mark what?" "This. Hope. Your survival." He took a deep breath. "The Thorn Foundation is endowing a new wing at Lenox Hill, a state-of-the-art neonatal intensive care unit, the best in the world." Elise's eyes filled with tears. "Johnny, that's incredible." "I've already put the funds in escrow," he continued, rushing the words. "But it needs a name, and I was hoping—" He unrolled a small blue architectural drawing on the coffee table. On the bottom, in elegant block script, it read, "The Elise and Hope Davies Wing for Neonatal Care." Elise's hand flew to her mouth. "Davies," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not Hayes." "That name is gone," Johnny said, his voice fierce and low. "That name is a brand of failure and cruelty. This is your name. This is your legacy. When people talk about what happened, they won't just remember the Gala attack. They will remember the survivor who turned her pain into a sanctuary for other families, for other hopes. This is how you take the power back, Elise. This is how you win. Not by destroying him, but by building this." She was sobbing now, tears of pure, unadulterated release. "You did this. We did this," he corrected softly. He stepped closer, his hands finding hers. "Ellie, I've spent 15 years regretting the one time in my life I was a coward. I've spent my whole life building an empire, collecting companies and properties, and I was the emptiest man in the world. The night I saw you at that gala, I realized I didn't want the empire. I just wanted a home." He gently, tentatively, reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I am so in love with you," he whispered, the admission hanging in the quiet room. "I have been since I was 15. I know you're healing. I know this is a lot. I am not Matthew. I will never push you. I will wait. I will wait a lifetime. I am here. And I am not going anywhere this time." Elise looked at this man who had seen her at her most broken, her most terrified, and had not tried to fix her, but had simply held the pieces until she could put them together herself. She looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully, safe in a home built on love, not on transactions. She stood on her toes, her hand moving from his to his chest, right over his heart. It was hammering. "You're in charge of the hospital wing, Johnny," she whispered, a small, watery smile on her lips. "But I think I'm in charge of this." She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of a new romance. It was a kiss of arrival. It was a kiss of forgiveness for the years they had lost, and a promise for the years they had found. It was the closing of a 15-year-old wound and the opening of a new, beautiful, and very real life. "Welcome home, Ellie," he whispered against her lips. "Welcome home, Johnny," she replied. In the end, this wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was a story of survival. Elise thought she had lost everything in that ballroom, but what she really lost was the cage she had been living in. She lost a coward and, in the most unexpected way, found a protector, a partner, and her own strength. Her ex-husband and his mistress faced their public karma, but the real victory wasn't their downfall. It was Elise's rise. She and her baby girl, Hope, got the new beginning they deserved. What do you think? What was the biggest twist for you? Was it Matthew's cowardice, or Johnny's history with Elise? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. These real-life stories are crazier than fiction. If you were moved by Elise's story, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see that a new beginning is always possible, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories of karma and redemption coming your way. Thank you for listening.